Most people choose where they're going to retire based on the life they imagine having at 62, 65, or maybe 70 years old. They picture good weather, golf, pickleball, restaurants, friends, a beautiful home, and finally having the time to enjoy it all. But I think there's another question just as important. Will the place you choose at 65 still work for you at 75, 80, or even 85? And that's the one thing I think the reason for Lakewood Ranch may be one of the most complete retirement locations in Florida. Not because it's perfect and not because it's the right place for everyone, but because it works remarkably well through several very different stages of retirement. In this video, I want to show you what I mean, because when you're choosing where to spend potentially the next 20 or 30 years of your life, you're really choosing much more than a house. You're choosing an environment that has to continue working as your life changes. Let's start with the beginning of retirement. A lot of people in the first 10 years of retirement aren't really about slowing down at all. They're about finally having time. Time to travel, time to exercise, time to play golf or pickleball, time to go out to dinner on a Tuesday night instead of waiting for the weekend, time to meet people, time to volunteer, time to pursue interests you didn't have time for while you were working. And Lakewood Ranch is very good at that version of retirement. You have golf, tennis, pickleball, fitness centers, pools, walking, biking trails, opportunities, restaurants, shopping, community events, and tremendous varieties of neighborhoods. If you want an active 55-plus community, you have choices. If you don't want to live in a 55-plus community, you have choices. If you want a country club, you have choices. If you don't want golf anywhere near your HOA bill, you have choices. You can buy a villa, a condominium, a modest single-family home, a larger home, new construction, resale, something approaching true luxury. And I think that flexibility matters more than people realize, because there's no single definition of retirement anymore. I've met people in their 60s who are busier than they were when they were working. Some are traveling constantly. Some are still working part-time. Some are running businesses. Some are playing golf 4 days a week. And some want absolutely nothing to do with organized activities. A good retirement location has to accommodate more than one version of retirement. But here's what I think the conversation gets more interesting. What happens 10 or 15 years later? Because the things that attract you to a place in your early 60s may not be the same things that matter most in your late 70s. And at some point, proximity starts to become more important. How far are you from your doctors? How far are you from healthcare? How far are you from a grocery store? How far from the restaurants? How difficult is it to get to where you need to go? Are there things to do close to home? Can you change the kind of house you live in without leaving the entire area you've come to know? And this is where I think Lakewood Ranch has another significant advantage. You're not living in an isolated retirement development surrounded by miles of very little else. This is part of a much larger region. You have Lakewood Ranch itself, but it's also connected to Sarasota, Bradenton, and the surrounding Gulf Coast. Healthcare is nearby, shopping is nearby, everyday services are nearby. You have University Town Center area, you have restaurants and entertainment, you have access to Sarasota's arts and cultural scene. You can get to the Gulf Coast beaches very easily. And you have an airport close enough that visiting children, grandchildren, and friends doesn't have to become an expedition. That combination becomes increasingly valuable as you get older. And there's another part of this that I think people overlook. You may not want the same house forever. Let's say you move here at 63. You buy a beautiful larger home with a pool. You entertain. The children and grandchildren visit. You love having the space. Great. But at 78, maybe you don't want to maintain that much house anymore. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave Lakewood Ranch. You may be able to move into a smaller single-family home, a villa, a condominium, a maintenance-assisted community, or possibly an active adult community that now fits the life you're living much better. And that's important because moving isn't just about real estate. By then, you've built relationships. You found your doctors. You know where to shop. You know where you like to eat. You have friends. Maybe your church is here. Maybe you're volunteering somewhere. Maybe your children have even moved closer to you. Being able to change the house without necessarily changing the entire life can be incredibly valuable. And that brings me to something else I think Lakewood Ranch gets right. It's multi-generational. There are retirees here, obviously, but there are also families. There are working professionals, there are children, there are people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And depending on what you want, you can either live inside a 55-plus environment, or you can live in a traditional all-age community. And that creates a very different feeling from most places designed almost exclusively around retirement. And neither approach is necessarily better. This is where a comparison with a place like The Villages becomes interesting. The Villages has built an extraordinary lifestyle around retirement. If what you want is a huge retirement-centered environment with an enormous social structure, activities, golf, and lifestyle, where retirement itself is almost the organizing principle of the community, that can be very attractive. But Lakewood Ranch offers something different. Here, retirement is a part of a larger community rather than the entire identity of the community. And I think for some people, that's exactly what they want. They want to retire, but they don't necessarily want to feel like they've moved into a place designed exclusively for retirees. They still want restaurants filled with people of different ages. They want families around. They want cultural activities. They want access to real regional economies. And they want children or grandchildren to eventually live nearby. They want to retire without necessarily living inside a retirement bubble, and that is an important distinction. And we're going to do another video specifically comparing Lakewood Ranch to The Villages because I think the two represent very different and both very successful approaches to retirement in Florida. But here's the larger point I want you to take away from this video. When you're deciding where to retire, don't simply ask, would I enjoy living here next year? Ask, how many versions of my retirement could I live here? Could you enjoy being here when you're 65 and incredibly active? Could you still enjoy it when you're 75 and traveling less? Could you manage life here if driving becomes difficult? Could you change your housing without leaving your friends and support system? Would healthcare still be accessible? Would your spouse be comfortable living here alone? Could your children or grandchildren comfortably visit and perhaps someday live nearby? Those are very different questions from whether you like the model home. And they're questions I think more people should ask before they relocate. Because the best retirement relocation isn't simply the place with the nicest amenities. It's the place that gives you the greatest chance of building a life that can continue working as you change. And that's why I describe Lakewood Ranch as potentially one of Florida's most complete retirement locations. You can be active, you can be social, you can choose 55 plus or all age living. You have different housing types. You have healthcare and everyday services nearby. You have Sarasota and the Gulf Coast around you. And if your priorities change over time, you have a reasonable chance of changing the way you live without having to start your entire life somewhere else. Does that make Lakewood Ranch perfect? No. There are things I would absolutely want you to understand before moving here, including the cost, the traffic, community fees, and how spread out certain areas can be, and the fact that not every neighborhood provides the same lifestyle. And we'll continue talking about all of those things on this channel. But if you're looking at Florida for retirement, I think this is the question worth asking. Are you choosing the best place for the first 5 years of your retirement, or are you choosing the place that still may work 20 years from now? If you're considering Lakewood Ranch, Sarasota, Manatee County, or Florida's Gulf Coast, subscribe to the channel. I talk about the communities, the costs, the housing, the choices, and increasingly long-term decisions that can make the difference between simply moving to Florida and actually building a retirement that works. And in the next video, we're going to take this one step further. Lakewood Ranch versus the Villages, because they're both incredibly popular retirement choices. But I think they're built around two very different ideas of what retirement should look like. I'm George Latos, and I'll see you in the next video.